called.
Without objection.
I ask consent to speak for as much time as I may require.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, tomorrow, the United States House of Representatives will vote on a piece of legislation that many in this body on both sides of the aisle have worked on, and that the majority leader of the Senate has described as the single most important piece of legislation that will pass this year. We call it 21st Century Cures, and it will be amended to add 3 mental health reform acts, the most significant reforms in mental health programs in 10 years. I ask consent to place into the record following my remarks the organizations supporting the 21st Century Cures legislation, more than 200 different organizations from all across the country.
Without objection.
Now, why would the majority leader say that it's the most important legislation the Senate might act on? Because we do a lot of important stuff around here, whether it's defense authorization, whether it's cybersecurity, whether it's the bill to fix No Child Left Behind that we passed in a bipartisan way last December. I think it's because that this legislation will affect virtually every American family, because we're entering the most exciting period of medical research in our country. That's the first part of it. And the second part, the part that has to do with mental health, affects so many families because we know that about 1 out of every 5 adult Americans suffers from some form of mental illness. And this concentrates the large amount of money we actually spend on mental health every year from the federal government, and spends it a more effective way to actually help people. Now, in the next few minutes, what I would like to do is to acquaint the Senate again with how we've gone about this and remind senators of how many of us have had a hand in this legislation, because it's a really remarkable 2 years of work that's involved many hearings, dozens of meetings, and that has been done in a large committee of 22 senators of very different points of view in a largely bipartisan way. So let me begin to summarize the first thing I would mention. The legislation includes $6.3 billion of funding. $1 billion of it is for state opioids grants. Now, whether it's Senator Whitehouse of Rhode Island or whether it's Senator Ayotte and Senator Portman, probably most senators in this body have seen on the front pages of their newspapers, I know that's true in Tennessee, the tragedies of opioid abuse. This bill helps that in 2 ways. The most immediate way is provide state grants, federal dollars, to go to states over the next 2 years to help states fight opioid abuse. The other way that it helps, when we get to the part about 21st Century Cures, is that Dr. Francis Collins, who is the head of the National Institutes of Health, Dr. Collins calls it the National Institutes of Hope, says that one of the groundbreaking discoveries that we expect to happen in this country in the next 10 years is a non-addictive pain medicine. The problem with opioids is it's addictive. Now, people need it if you have a back surgery or if you have terrible pain. Opioids can help people. We know that. But it's addictive and it's causing normal problems. What if we had non-addictive pain medicine? So this bill helps that in 2 ways. There's other funding in this legislation. $4.8 billion to the National Institutes of Health. Now, let's see. Let me see what's next. The first $4.8 billion, this is for biomedical research. The first $1.8 billion is for Cancer Moonshot. This is Vice President Biden's initiative. He is motivated for many reasons by it. His son died of cancer. Many of us have family members or friends with cancer. There are startling discoveries going on in cancer today. And this is $1.8 billion in support of the Vice President Cancer Moonshot. Then there's $1.4 billion in precision medicine. This is one of President Obama's most important initiatives. I know that he has said very realistically he expects it to happen anyway, but he'd like to move it along. This helps move it along. What this means is that if the senator from Oklahoma and I each have a disease, that because of our genetic background, the medicine we might get for that disease should be different. If we know that genetic difference between the two of us, the doctor can prescribe it. That's called personalized medicine or precision medicine. Then there's $1.6 billion for the Brain Initiative. This includes groundbreaking research in Alzheimer's, for example. I talked to one drug manufacturer who has spent more than $1 billion, several more than $1 billion, trying to develop a medicine that will help identify the symptoms of Alzheimer's, to identify Alzheimer's before it shows symptoms, and then another medicine that will retard the progression of Alzheimer's. Now, imagine what could happen in our country if the tens of millions of Americans who are going to suffer with Alzheimer's, if we can find that out before they actually have the symptoms, and then we can slow down the progression of Alzheimer's. Think of the suffering that would help avoid. Think of the billions of dollars it would save. This is for that kind of research. Dr. Collins says that during this next 10 years, he expects us to have on the market medicines that identify Alzheimer's before we know the symptoms, see the symptoms, and medicines that will stop the progression of Alzheimer's. Now, it also includes $500 million for the Food and Drug Administration to help pay for the extra work that we're giving the FDA. Now, one senator was on the floor talking about this bill and suggested that this isn't enough money. Let's take this down just a minute. Let's talk about money just a minute. The United States spends more on research and development, biomedical research and development, than Europe, Japan, and China put together, almost as much as those three countries put together. There has nevertheless been a real need for increased funding for the kinds of things that I've just mentioned. But the way we do things here is we have authorization bills, which this is, where we decide what our policies and our programs are going to be. And some of us are on those committees, like the committee I chair, and Senator Murray of Washington is the ranking Democrat, the Health Committee in this case. Then we have appropriations committees that decide how much we can afford to spend on that. We do that separately. Last year, this Congress, it was a Republican Congress, I would point out, Republican majority, but Senator Blunt, who's chairman of the Appropriations Committee for the Senate, would quickly give Senator Murray, who's the ranking Democrat, full credit, added $2 billion to the National Institutes of Health budget for 1 year. That means $20 billion new dollars over 10 years. This year, the same Republican Congress, with the cooperation of the Democratic members, added another $2 billion to the National Institutes of Health budget. That's another $20 billion over 10 years. And the cures legislation that I've just described is another $5 billion. So that's 20, 20, and 5. Add that up to $45 billion new dollars approved. Now, the first $20 billion has law. The second $20 billion has just been approved by the appropriations committees. Hopefully it'll become law. And the $5 billion I've just described comes here. Now, that's real money. That's real money. And it's unusual to find an appropriations bill stuck on an authorization bill, but we've done it this time because this is an unusual opportunity. And we've done it in a way that Speaker Ryan in the House of Representatives believes is fiscally responsible. That means it doesn't add any new mandatory spending. That kind of spending has got the budget going through the roof, so it doesn't do that. It means that it's paid for That means we've reduced other spending to pay for it. So when you look at the entire budget, it doesn't add a penny to the entire budget. We call it the discretionary plus the mandatory part, because it's paid for by reducing other spending. So we've set priorities. We've done our job, and the Appropriations Committee has done its job in consecutive years, approving $20 billion more over 10 years for the National Institutes of Health, and we'll add another 5 here just to the National Institutes of Health. Now let's talk about the bipartisan nature of this bill. I'm going to go through this fairly quickly, but for those watching, I think it's important for you to see this, because sometimes when bills are popular, and I think this one will be popular, everyone says, well, that's easy. That didn't take a lot of work. Tomorrow, the House of Representatives will vote on the 21st Century Cures bill. It will add the mental health bill that I'll describe in just a minute by amendment. I think it will be on suspension, which means they expect a big vote over there. I expect a big vote over here, because I don't expect there are a lot of senators who want to vote no on $1 billion in funding for opioids abuse in their home state. I don't think there'll be a lot of senators who want to vote no on more money to fight cancer and to help the vice president with the Cancer Moonshot. I suspect there'll be a lot of senators who want to vote yes to help the president advance his precision medicine legacy. And I know there are families with Alzheimer's all over the country who hope the senators vote yes on the brain initiative. So I imagine we'll get a big vote here when it comes up next Monday and Tuesday after the House passes it tomorrow. But as we put this bill together, there was plenty of controversy, there was plenty of conflict, but virtually everything we did was bipartisan. Now, the money I just described is certainly bipartisan. The president's initiative, the vice president's initiative, those are the opioids initiative, that's bipartisan. But look at the bills that we're talking about. Here's one called the Advanced Target Therapies. It allows researchers to use their own data from previously approved therapies to help find a faster treatment for serious genetic diseases. Senator Bennett, Democrat. Senator Warren, Democrat. Senator Burr, Republican. Senator Hatch, Republican. And it passed by voice vote. That means unanimously. In fact, Mr. President, I'm going to go through very quickly 19 different bills that are the core of the 21st Century Cure legislation. They came out of our committee, which has 22 members, and the largest number of recorded votes against any one of those 19 amendments was 2. Because every single one of these amendments had a Democratic sponsor and a Republican sponsor, except for one, and that was Senator Murray's bill, and she is the ranking Democrat on our committee. So don't let anyone suggest to you that a bill that has $6.3 billion of appropriations that include Democratic priorities and bipartisan priorities, and that the core of it is 19 bills of FDA reform that has a Democratic sponsor for every single bill, and that was approved by a 22-member committee and only had 2 recorded votes against, was the most that was against it. Don't let anybody say to you that this is not a bipartisan bill. Anyone who says that simply hasn't spent the time to be involved in the process. So let's go to the next one. Now, Burr and Franken, Republican and Democrat, FDA device accountability. It will bring innovative devices like artificial knees and insulin pumps to patients more quickly by getting rid of unnecessary regulations. One of the major things we need to do, and we do it in this bill, is to bring cures and discoveries through the regulatory process more quickly and at less cost. All of us are concerned about the high price of medicine, the high price of drugs. Well, one reason is because it takes $1 billion and 13 or 15 years to take a new discovery through the process. We'd like to shorten that as long as we can do it in a way that ensures that it's safe. The next one is called the Next Generation Researchers Act. Senator Baldwin, Democrat, Senator Collins, Republican. Improves opportunities for our young researchers. Passed by voice vote. That means there was no objection. The next one is called the Enhancing Rehabilitation Research at the National Institutes of Health. Kirk, Republican, Bennett, Democrat, Hatch, Republican, Murkowski, Republican, Republican Isaacson and Collins, enhancing rehabilitation research, passed by voice vote. Neurological diseases research. Here we have Isaacson and Murphy, Republican, Democrat, advancing research for neurological diseases. Next one has to do with the superbugs and protecting patients. You know about these, you've heard about them. The bugs, the diseases you get, and you take a medicine for the disease, and the medicine doesn't work because the bugs are superbugs. And they will clarify that the FDA requires cleaning and validation data for reusable medical devices. In other words, this will make it less likely that that will be a problem. That's Senator Murray's bill. Improving health IT. This is electronic health care records. The government has spent a huge amount of money on that, maybe $30 billion, including hospitals and doctors to do it, to adopt electronic medical records. It's very important to precision medicine, to personalized medicine, because if you can't use all this data, a doctor is not going to prescribe something for the senator from Oklahoma that's different from something from the senator from Tennessee. We found that the electronic medical record system was a mess. And we had 6 hearings on it. And we worked with the Obama administration because they could do some things to fix it, and we could do some things to fix it. And I say to Secretary Burwell in the Obama administration, I thank her for the efforts that she has made to do what they could do, and Andy Slavitt at CMS. And these are the things that we could do. Senator Murray was involved. Senator Cassidy, Senator Whitehouse, Senator Hatch, Senator Bennett, a bipartisan effort to reduce physician documentation on electronic health care records, to make it more interoperable, and to get this system moving again. Advancing breakthrough medical devices. This one of the great successes we've had in legislation has been a few years ago. Senator Bennett and Senator Burr, among others, introduced a bill and made it law that brought breakthrough medicines through the Food and Drug Administration more rapidly. More than 100 have been approved in about 4 or 5 years. So we're applying that same breakthrough strategy to medical devices. And of course, we have bipartisan support for that. There's the Advancing Hope Act. If you're a parent of a child with a rare disease like brain cancer, this increases the opportunity that the drug will help. Medical electronic data technology. There we had Senator Bennett, Democrat, Senator Hatch, Republican. Medical Countermeasures Innovation Act. This is very important. Senator Burr and Casey have been real leaders in dealing with medical countermeasures. These are in case there's a bioterror attack, anthrax, some kind of problem like that. Are we ready to deal with that? This helps to do that. And just a few more. And some will say, well, why are you going on so long? Because I would like for people to know, when it happens, that this Senate is capable of taking a great, big, complex subject, and Democrats and Republicans are capable of working together to produce a result that deserves a big vote. Combination Products Innovation Act. This helps to bring to the market combination products of medical devices and medicines at the same time. And then there's a bill by Wicker, Bennett, Collins, Klobuchar, Isaacson, and Franken on patient-focused impact assessment. There is one on to modernize the FDA workforce. Dr. Califf told us that his biggest problem at the FDA is that he can't hire all the people he needs to deal with all of the exciting things going on. This gives him new authority to do that. Everybody thinks that would be an important thing to do. It was approved by voice vote. And then Advancing Precision Medicine. This is legislation that I introduced in support of the President's Precision Medicine Initiative that I've talked about before. And then there's other legislation that went through. But the point of all this is 19 different bills are the core of this 21st Century Act. There only the most number of recorded votes against these bills was two. And every single one was sponsored by a Democrat as well as a Republican, except for one, which was Senator Murray's bill, and she's the ranking Democrat on the committee. Now, in conclusion, we're fortunate to be able to add to the bill the Mental Health Act. Actually, it's 3 mental health acts, and together they make up the most significant reform of mental health programs that we've had in more than a decade. I want to give particular credit to Senator Murphy, Democrat, and to Senator Cassidy, Republican, for working together through some real landmines to get this to a place where it could pass the House almost unanimously and where it will be a part of the bill that we'll vote on next year. I want to thank the Majority Whip, Senator Cornyn, who also added an important judicial part to this legislation and helped us navigate some difficult things. In other words, these senators show that they know how to legislate. They could have stood up and made a speech. They could have insisted on doing things exactly their way, but they said, let's look for the area where we might agree on 70 or 80% of the policy, and let's agree with that. So, Mr. President, this is one of those bills, and look at the number of Republicans and Democrats who have passed that. And then here's the second, I guess, mental health bill that we're talking about, and you can see the number of senators of that. So I've taken some time to go through the legislation that will be coming to the Senate early next week that will be voted on tomorrow in the House of Representatives. I do think it represents, likely, as the Majority Leader has suggested, the most important piece of legislation that we could act on this year, because it affects virtually every American family. Forbes magazine reported that 78% of the American people favored the Congress taking action on medical innovation because they've heard people like Dr. Francis Collins, the head of the National Institutes of Health, talk about, within the next 10 years, a Zika vaccine, an HIV/AIDS vaccine, a medicine to identify Alzheimer's before its symptoms and to retard its progression, an artificial pancreas for those with diabetes, a non-addictive type of pain medicine. These are magnificent opportunities for us. We have strong leadership of the National Institutes of Health. And so we've put our money where our mouth is. Now, it is true that we'll have to approve it every year. And it is true that we had to reduce other spending in order to have this spending, but that's the way we're supposed to do things. What we have done is take a bipartisan core of bills, worked hard for 2 years in a bipartisan way, and produced a result that had very few no votes on the way, and it includes Democratic priorities as well as Republican priorities, that has the avid interest of the Democratic President of the United States, the Democratic Vice President of the United States. It's a part of the agenda forward in the health care for the Republican Speaker of the House, and the Republican Majority Leader in the Senate says it's the most important bill we're going to act on. Now, I would think that'd get a big vote tomorrow in the House, and I would think it deserves a big vote in the House, in the United States Senate next week, and it's been my privilege to work with Senator Murray and the other members of the Health, Education, and Labor Committee to produce the bill.